I'm Judy Sternberg, President of the League of Women Voters of the Rochester metropolitan area. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that does not support or oppose any political parties or candidates. We encourage informed and active participation in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. The League is open to absolutely anyone who shares our purposes and principles. Tonight, we are pleased to be bringing to you a presentation from the Executive Director and Chairperson of the Police Accountability Board. And now I'll turn you over to Barbara Grosh, our Director of Voter Services.
Hi, thank you, Judy. Okay, so it's my pleasure tonight to introduce our two speakers. We've got Shawnee Wilson here. Shawnee is the president of the Police Accountability Board, and by day she's also, she works at Trillium Healthcare, which we love because we often register voters right next to your vans that are all over the city at every festival in town. And then we've got Connor Reynolds, who is the executive director of the Police Accountability Board. I'm not going to try to fill you in on the backgrounds because probably they are going to do that themselves. Connor's a lawyer by training and by experience. I can mention that about him. So I'm going to invite them to open their mics. I'm going to turn off my camera in a moment. So we will be taking questions and answers tonight. There's lots of time for that. So if you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat. And otherwise, I'm going to turn off my camera for a while. We'll let them make a presentation. And then in a little while, I'll come back on and ask some of the questions that have come in the Q&A. All right. Thank you. Welcome, folks. Take it away.
Hi, thank you so much, folks. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for being so incredibly kind and setting up this informational session that we can share our budget proposal that we are doing with the city, and really excited about being able to speak to you all. So I'm Shawnee Wilson. I am the chair of the Rochester Police Accountability Board. I am a physician assistant here in the city. I specialize in internal medicine. And I actually don't work at Trillium Health anymore. I actually am currently working at Anthony Jordan Health Center in their urgent care. And I also work in the respiratory clinic testing COVID patients. And so that's kind of my game right now of really wanted to get out of internal medicine. It's been almost 9 years of doing that. So I'm really loving just the urgent care setting and just taking care of Black and brown people that are ill within our city. So and I also I've done hepatitis C, HIV, primary care, and I've also done medication assisted therapy or opioid treatment as well for folks that are dealing with drug use. And so really excited about being here with you all. And I'll introduce Connor Dwyer Reynolds.
Hey everyone, Connor Dwyer Reynolds. I am a lawyer, unfortunately, but I'm from Rochester, born, raised, everything. So excited to be back here. You know, spent my PAB career kind of suing the government and watching it from the outside, and now I'm on the inside, and I couldn't be more excited to be with the League of Women Voters tonight, not only because we're always bumping shoulders at the public market, you folks trying to get people registered, but because we share a similar mission. You know, PAB is part of local government, but our job is to be good government. We have a legal duty to be very transparent, very, very open. Right now, you know, fighting for things like pay equity is actually part of our day-to-day work, you know, so it's not just about holding the police accountable, creating a more equitable, safe, better system of local government for everyone, but making sure that government on a fundamental level does its job well. And so thank you for being here. We're looking forward to your comments, your feedback on our plans for reimagining public safety in the year to come. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to do this presentation, and I'm going to kick it over to Chair Wilson to get us started once I get the slideshow going.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
All right, hold on 1 second. Make sure I'm looking at this right thing. There we go. Okay.
Okay. All right. So in 2019, thanks to the support of community organizations like the League of Women Voters, Rochesterians overwhelmingly voted to transform policing and public safety through the Police Accountability Board. Over the last 6 months, the PAB has been crafting a plan to perform the job our community has tasked us with. So we hit the books and we did the research. We gathered the data. We spoke to experts in cities like Chicago, Cleveland, New Orleans, New York City, and Oakland that have their own police accountability boards or citizen review boards. And then we crunched the numbers. And all of that work resulted in an 85-page budget proposal that is available on our website and also available to you all. Over the next 15 minutes, we want to give you a quick overview of our plan, showing you how the PAB will create change, what resources we need to do our job, and how you can help make sure the PAB gets to work. We'll end by opening up the floor for questions.
So the PAB is supposed to create change in three distinct ways. First, we're supposed to end the current system of slowly, secretly, and unfairly investigating allegations of police conduct. We're tasked with replacing the current system with one where highly trained civilians investigate allegations of police misconduct quickly, transparently, and fairly for both the sake of the community and police officers, both officers accused of misconduct and officers who are willing to report misconduct to the PAB. While our power to discipline officers is on hold, thanks to a lawsuit filed by the local police union, our independent investigations into police misconduct are still important because they can show the community the truth about what happened in any given instance of misconduct. Now, to conduct these investigations, the city charter gives the PAB the power to do all the things you need: collect evidence, subpoena documents, obtain testimony from police officers, access RPD's body-worn camera database, and everything else you need to have thorough, comprehensive investigations. We have the power right now to get this done. Now, I want to talk briefly because there's some misunderstanding about what the PAB's investigations look like. Right now, we have a civilian review board that works with the police department to do investigations. Some people think that the PAB is just this old civilian review board with disciplinary powers. That's not true. Let me explain what the current system does. This is important because you'll realize the resources we need to actually do our jobs. The civilian review board starts by helping people file complaints with the police's internal affairs unit, right? They don't actually do investigations. They have the police department do those investigations, right? The police department has a $1.1 million internal investigation unit, right? So the civilian review board, which is a group of local citizens, wait for RPD to do their investigation, and then they just review the facts that the police reviewed, right? So it's essentially, for better or worse, a bit of Monday morning quarterbacking. You look at the exact same facts that the city's RPD looked at, and you say, was the city right to impose discipline on officers or to not impose discipline, right? And then they just come out with their decision, right? That's what the current system looks like in terms of the civilian input into police accountability, right? And how quick does this system work? Well, the average investigation takes about 8 months. 8 months from a complaint being filed to a resolution. Imagine if you're a community member having to wait almost a year to get results. Imagine if you're a police officer having to have an allegation hanging over your head for almost a year. Not ideal, not the way it should work. Here's how the PAB is supposed to do things. For every complaint, we take in the complaint, right? We are the investigating body. We identify the officers and basic facts. We collect witnesses, video evidence, forensic evidence. Think about what happens in an officer-involved shooting. We're supposed to be there picking up the evidence, right? Seriously, that's our job. We have to interview everyone. We have to issue and enforce subpoenas, legal orders to make sure people give us evidence. And then for every allegation, we have to write up a whole report, present it to the Police Accountability Board, our group of civilians who run the agency. And we have to release that report to the public and release all body-worn camera footage too. We have to have a totally transparent system here, right? While still respecting the privacy of those involved. And if the board sees those facts independently gathered by civilians, then they may decide to formally charge the officers with wrongdoing. If that happens, there has to be a whole nother process, an evidentiary hearing. There's witnesses, subpoenas, cross-examination, everything you'd see on Law and Order, right? Including what looks like a judicial opinion at the end. That's not the end. The officer and the complainant, if it doesn't, go their way, they both have a chance to appeal. And then the board has to have an internal appeals process, right? So compare all of this, what we have to do, to that smaller process, right? We're just completely different than what came before. Oh, and by the way, how long is it supposed to take us to do this? 3 months, right? So the old process was 8 months for a lot less, and we have to do all this in 3 months, right? Means we need a lot more resources than what we were given before. So this is why we're asking the city to allow us to properly exercise our powers by funding an officer accountability unit with 1 staff member for every 25 officers. And we kind of came up with that figure by crunching the data from other civilian review boards on how quickly they took to investigate cases based on the number of staff they have, right? You can come up with the ratios and understandings to predict how much resources we'll need. And this is what we came up with, right? And this is enough staff that we think we need to get into that 3-month time frame, right? So here's the thing, RPD currently spends about $1.2 million investigating officers. So how much are we asking for? Well, we're asking for 2.2 million. And so that's less than what RPD currently spends on its own internal investigation process and how much they spend on supplies, right? So that's what we're asking. City, can you invest as much in us as you currently spend on papers, pencils, and investigating officers already? That's what we're asking for this, right? Okay, but that's only the one thing we're supposed to do. I'm going to kick it back to Chair Wilson to talk about our second major task.
Right. So the second thing we're supposed to do, folks, is create lasting systemic change here. Right now the system responds to police brutality with quick fixes and small reforms. The PAB is supposed to create community-driven, evidence-based proposals that will create lasting fundamental change. We have the power to create this change by making every aspect of RPD's work transparent, so the community can know what works, what doesn't work, and what needs to change. The city charter gives us the power to create that kind of transparency by requiring the RPD to allow us to access any source of information that we need. Bringing this kind of system-wide transparency and change to the largest, most powerful part of city government will take a team of experts. That's why we want to create a systemic change unit within the PAB staffed with policy analysts and oversight investigators. This team will develop the dedicated resources our community needs to develop the detailed plans necessary to reshape our Rochester's public safety system. We're asking the city to spend as much on this systemic change unit as it does on RPD supply budget, which Connor just mentioned.
And I just want to note that, the important thing here is that we work with all community groups. ROCAX is just one of the community groups that's deeply involved in policing, but it's everyone here. So, to the extent that League of Women Voters wants to get involved in police reform on a more in-depth level with an agency of city government, we exist to make that happen. So our third task here is to change the way our community understands and participates in local government. The PAB is supposed to ensure that you and your neighbors are educated about and engaged in the decisions our city is making about public safety. We have to make sure that every Rochesterian knows how to do things like file complaints regarding police misconduct, things that right now, so many citizens don't know how to do. We're also supposed to make sure that people understand the basic facts of policing. What is it that the average officer does? How much do you pay them? What is the cost benefit on hiring a new officer, right? These are the facts we need to get out there. And we have to make sure that every Rochesterian has a say in our work, right? A say in helping the PAB craft proposals, helping us create our rules, helping us teach the community and learn from the community, right? And making sure the community's voice is heard when it comes to public safety changes, like discussions about changing the police department's rules or the size of the department or the way that we spend our money when it comes to public safety. It's our job to help the community with all of this. We have to, by law, conduct public surveys, create comprehensive education programs, and engage the community, and not just the community as a whole, but all parts of the community, especially people most affected by policing. That is police officers and people involved at the other end of policing, folks who are in neighborhoods where there's a lot of police, that kind of thing. We're supposed to center all parts of our community in this work. So what does it take to do all of this work? To perform our core mission of investigating cases, creating systemic change and uplifting our community. Our budget proposal asks the city to provide the PAB with the staff, equipment, and expense budget necessary to do our jobs. You know, the budget gets into everything from office space to cell phones to, you know, staffing, right? That budget asks the city to invest $1 in the PAB for every $20 we currently spend on policing. So that, because the RPD's budget's $100 million, we're asking for $5 million. Now, that's less than what the city currently spends on parking enforcement, parking garages, and parking meters, okay? So this is a little chart showing you what we're asking for. You know, stacking it up in terms of dollars and cents. For every $20 we're currently spending RPD, we want $1. And our current budget, by the way, it's just a fraction, a tiny fraction of what we're asking for, right? So the point here is that we're asking for a budget that's beyond the one that we have right now. It's saying that with our current budget, we can't do the job we've been asked to do. I kick it back to Chair Wilson.
So, you know, that might really seem like a huge investment, but I want to really put that into context. You know, right now the city spends millions in legal fees and settlements and other costs thanks to unaddressed police misconduct. The city spent, for instance, $2.5 million alone in responding to last year's policing-related protests. If a federal monitor is appointed to oversee our policing system, the city will have to pay millions more in monitor-related costs. These millions are, however, nothing compared to the cost of maintaining the current system. You know, what is the cost of having a child being pepper sprayed while handcuffed in the back of a police car? What is the cost of losing Rochesterians like Patricia Thompson, Craig Hurd, Alicia McCullough, Denise Hawkins, and so many others? If there was an agency dedicated to preventing these kinds of tragedies, what would we be willing to pay to make sure that it could do its job? You know, really, is $5 million too high a price to ensure that these tragedies never happen again?
You know, and I just want to emphasize this point, you know, the cost of tragedies, you know, of especially officer-involved shootings and deaths involving police. Obviously, the biggest cost is the death of the person, right? And the harm imposed on those their community, especially Black and brown communities that have to deal with this all the time. But it's also the cost on the officers, right? If an officer shoots someone, that costs them, right? Trauma for the rest of your life. Our job is to prevent those things from happening at a system level, prevent death from affecting everyone, right? This is a way to keep everyone safe, including police officers, addressing the roots of problems to make sure that no one has to be in these situations moving forward. You know, and you know, thinking back on our budget, I know you might be thinking, why does the PAB need so much money right now? Can't they start small and work up to something larger? Isn't that 5 million just going from 0 to 100? Now, we thought we could start small too when we started this research process, right? But then we spoke to the experts who helped build PABs in places like Chicago and New York City. And by the way, these experts are going to be coming to talk to us tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. We'll be live streaming on Facebook. You can hear it from the horse's mouth. Don't trust me. But those experts said, look, you need to have a fully funded, completely operational agency before you open your doors to accepting complaints. Here's why. Your agency will be judged by the community from the way the first complaint gets dealt with. If that first complaint isn't dealt with quickly, fairly, and thoroughly, the community won't trust the agency, and you'll never be able to get that trust back. So what we heard time and again is invest up front. You have to make the full investment up front. Otherwise, you are setting yourself up for failure, right? That's part of the reason the PAB isn't accepting complaints now, because we have one staff member, right? And how, you know, I can't tell you, it probably takes years for the staff members and me for me to just investigate complaints. That's not doing anyone a good service. Police officers are the community. We have to wait for the right resources. And the $5 million we're asking for, that actually is a very conservative figure. We use very conservative estimates about the number of complaints we're going to get, you know, how long the investigations will take. You know, so a true ramp up budget would be significantly more than that, right? So we're actually are in the big picture of things starting small. Another reason though to start big is because it allows you to end small. If the PAB does our job right from day one, allegations of police misconduct will plummet, right? Because we'll be addressing the systemic issues, right? And the need for new policies will decrease, right? So our policy unit and our investigations unit can be smaller over time. If we do the work now, we can prevent having to do work later. The PAB is a drawdown agency, right? Which is all the more reason to make the investment now so we can save money in the future. I'll kick it back to Chair Wilson to give us an ending.
So to sum it up, Rochester deserves a fair and transparent functional policing system. The PAB is an unprecedented tool for creating that system. With the resources we need to do our jobs, we can deliver the fundamental change our community so desperately needs. We'd really love to take your questions. And before we do, Connor, can you give some information about upcoming deadlines, please?
Yes. Okay. So here are the important deadlines. May 15th, that's this Friday, the mayor will be proposing a budget for the PAB as part of the city's budget process. We're going to be in there. 1 month later, city council will vote to either approve or modify the city's budget. And then on June 22nd, there's election day, which I'm sure all League of Women Voters folks know about. So, things that you can do to help out. Well, first, you can ask current council members, do you support the PAB's budget? Great question to be asking people. And we have contact information if you need it. You can also invite the PAB to present to other community groups you may be a part of, folks who might want to learn more about our work, folks who may want to be looking to support fundamental change in our policing system. Finally, you can sign up to keep posted of PAB happening. So we are developing a community engagement list. So if folks, you want to get in touch, email pab@cityofrochester.gov. I'm going to put that in the chat for anyone who doesn't have it, pab@cityofrochester.gov. We will get you linked up with our outreach efforts moving forward so you can be connected with us. And with that, Chair Wilson, I think that's the end of our presentation part. We'd love to just hear more from you.
Wait, do you want to hear more from me?
Oh, I'm sorry, from them.
Oh, from them. Okay.
I hear from you all the time.
I know you hear from me every day, so I don't think you want to talk to me. Whether you want to talk to the people and see what they have questions on. I think so, yes. Let's do that.
All right, I have some questions. So that was a lot coming at me. So I'm gonna slow you down and force you through some of the stuff that I think I understood, but I'm not 100% sure I understood. So you currently have all the powers you would need to do an investigation. Now that lawsuit from the Locust Club, I'm not exactly sure what status that is. I take it it's not going to be resolved next week or next month. So you're proposing to start the kind of investigations that you would do when you have full disciplinary powers right now. Is that the case?
The moment we can get the resources, hire the staff, get the investigators trained, yeah, we'd like to open those investigations up. In part because imagine that disciplinary power never comes back. We still want to be able to investigate things, right? That's still something very important for the community, right? Right now, I don't think anyone thinks that the current process of investigating officer misconduct is working. I mean, I've talked to lots of officers who don't think it's working either, right? So if nothing else, being able to give that level of transparency to the community, that's something we can do.
So hearing you talk about the transparency was an eye-opener to me. I watch as many cop shows as everyone else, and internal affairs, that's the most secret place in the world. And so you're basically doing their same job that they do, and yet you're going to publish everything and all the evidence prior to indictments or charges or whatever disciplinary procedures would come out of your recommendations?
I want to be very clear about that. We have to be transparent about the body-worn camera footage, and we have to be transparent about the results of our decisions. That's true. We don't have to make every part of the process open. We still have to abide by professional standards of confidentiality and making sure that we respect everyone's privacy throughout the process. Part of the reason we're bringing on the experts, we'd love to have more experts in this, because we want to make sure that we do it the right way, respecting people, making sure that, allegations aren't being thrown out there all over the place. We want to make sure that the facts are coming out when we make things transparent. We just don't want to the moment something happens, we just put it out there, right? We want to have a process for educating the community about this. But yeah, I mean, facts, every time there's some kind of allegation, we want to make facts known at some point to the community. Yeah.
Okay, it's going to take me a while to get my head around that. Just thinking of what goes on in discovery and criminal cases, and usually everything's pretty secret until long into the process. So this is a much different process you're proposing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the thing I wanted to point out too is that, it's really when you actually really see what the Police Accountability Board can do or tasked to do, it's a lot. And this is what the city wanted, and this is what the city voted on. And, to have all this power to hold the Rochester Police Department accountable, it's unprecedented, and we have to make sure that it's done correctly. And so as mind expanding as it really seems to be, it really needs to be a process that is detailed, that is succinct, and that is fair, especially for officers that are going to be in this process. So, and also because, people demand justice here. We have people that 923 complaints, 923 complaints from 2016 until I think 2019. Correct me if I'm wrong. But those were complaints from citizens that had issues with their police. And so they deserve to be heard as well. So I think that's why it's like this.
The idea of having things resolved within 3 months, it's just really, that's making me smile.
Yeah, and I just want to say, everything we're talking about here, the transparency, the process, the deadlines, that's in the city charter, right? So this is not the PAB saying, here are our high aspirations. This is the law. So it's the PAB trying to follow the law here. I want to make that very clear to people.
Okay, which no one else has been doing apparently for quite some time.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, let me read the questions for a minute because I've still got my own questions, but things are coming in. Okay, so if you get these this budget and you are able to start these investigations before you get the disciplinary powers that we hope you will get, what will you do with your findings? You'll report them to the police chief, to the DA, you'll make them public? What exactly is the plan?
Yeah, we'd certainly make them public, right? I think the findings certainly we'll be making public. And then the body worn camera footage. I think, frankly, I think that you could come up with innovative ways to actually educate the public about what happened. I would go, I know this is, we have to literally write reports about this stuff, right? And then issue the reports, send the reports. The reports have to include, a disciplinary recommendation at the end, And the difference between what happens now versus if we had disciplinary power is that recommendation would be an order. That's really the difference, right? The rest of the process stays the same. And so, we have to inform the community about our findings, right? One of the biggest things of the PAB is not just, a new investigatory system, but educating the public about what happens about these allegations, right? And, this is something that, we hear from officers a lot is, someone says something wrong happened. It didn't. I wish people knew the truth. Right? That's something that happens all the time. And it's PAB's job to do that. Right? It's PAB's job to get that out there. And because right now, the current system of secretive investigations, no one knows all the facts, just trust us. That's not the way government should work.
Right. So can you, people are curious, what kind of people will you be hiring to do these investigations? What team do you have to put together to make this happen?
Our budget gets into the very specific details. We release job descriptions for every position we want to hire. The way that a lot of police accountability boards fail is by hiring underpaid, low qualification folks to do the investigations. And if you're a police officer, imagine someone tells you, yeah, the person who's going to be investigating you is someone who doesn't know what they're doing and they don't get paid any money. Do you think you'd trust that investigation? No, I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't, right? We are essentially tasked with being a district attorney's office, and all we do is deal with police allegations of police misconduct. It's the same level of investigation, the same level of quality. That's what we have to do. And that's why we're hoping to hire people with law degrees, right? Attorneys to do it right. That is the kind of people we're looking to hire as the kind of, investigating attorneys. They'd be supported by evidentiary staff, support staff, all the things that you have in district attorneys' offices too. Again, officers deserve fair investigations, and you can't provide that unless you have the staff to do it right. And just by the way, these attorneys that we're hoping to hire, the lowest part of the pay range, it's like $60,000 or something. So we're not trying to hire six-figure attorneys to do all this work, right? We're paying these people about what public defenders would get paid.
Right. Okay, so probably come back to some more questions on investigations, but I wanted to turn to the subject of policy. Okay, so I believe it was after the girl in handcuffs in the back of the police car was pepper sprayed. I could be wrong. It could have been the mother with the 3-year-old, but there was a statement released from the chief of police, I think, that said the officer had no choice. They did what they were required by our procedures to do. And then it was walked back very quickly because that was nonsense. But so somebody makes those decisions about what cops are supposed to do. And we see huge variability in what cops do. And sometimes it varies by who they're doing it to and in what neighborhood. So you're going to help make the police accountable. So I take it you're going to be really involved in setting up what those policies are, what the trainings are, what the guidelines are, what orders the police operate under. So I don't know a ton about how that happens now. I guess it all happens within the police department. So how will that look? You'll make recommendations, you'll make rules, you'll submit rules to the city council. Just give us an idea how you imagine that working.
So I'll start by saying that there's two ways it will work. If we don't have disciplinary power, what it will look like is, first, we look for the facts, right? I'll tell you something that city officials have told us when it comes to making new policy is you don't have to really investigate. You don't have to dedicate resources to policy review. You can just look at the videos that come out and you'll know what needs to change. That is not the approach we're going to take. You have to talk to experts. You got to talk to the community. You got to look at the facts. You got to look at the details, right? That takes time. But the important part is making the process transparent of how policing works here. For example, let's go to that instance that you talked about, the pepper spraying of the 9-year-old and the chief's statement saying officers were required to do this. Well, currently we're conducting a policy and procedure investigation. What happened there? Part of the reason it's taken so long is RPD hasn't given us the information we need to fill out our investigation. But I can tell you what we found out. We learned how it came to be that statement happened, right? By looking at the way the emails, documents that the police were generating during that process. And you can understand why the chief said what she did and then quickly pulled it back. And it's because of the way that RPD's internal procedures work when it comes to generating information about controversial incidents, right? And I promise you, we're going to make that transparent and then come out with a series of proposed changes for that, right? And we'll propose those changes, to city council, to the chief. The chief has to, whenever we propose a change to her, she has 30 days to either implement it or tell the public why she doesn't agree with the PAB. But we can also propose legislation to city council, right? And so that's what we do too. That's how the system would work now. Evidence-based, community-driven approach to real change by making things transparent, building proposals on that. If we get disciplinary power back, we actually gain more direct control of policing, right? Because it's our job to create a disciplinary matrix that says what counts as misconduct and what doesn't, right? So that's significant control over policing, right? So those are kind of two different ways, but no matter what, the community is going to getting real evidence-based, easy to implement policies. And I want to say what a radical difference that is from now. RPD has released policies, to address, things like use of force and de-escalation. I will say I have reviewed those policies. I walked through them with some experts. Those policies have no evidence behind them. There's no proof that they keep anyone, including police officers, more safe. And we don't know the process in which the police department came up with those rules, what research they did, what community members they spoke to. That's a process that fails everyone. I'm on the phone with Mike Mazzio talking about the head of the police union, saying, hey, did anyone talk to rank and file about these changes? No. How can you possibly expect that to work? This policy and procedure stuff is so important because it's saying that the system's the problem. And that is pro-community and pro-cop, right? Because it's saying the root isn't an individual. It's not you that's bad. It's these rules that aren't working for everyone. Let's focus on the roots of the problem. And right now, I promise you, that's not happening.
I also want to take another approach as well, because we're talking about, roots of the problem. We also need to talk about the system itself, and that also needs to be scrutinized policy-wise, right? So, we have, like, for instance, a lot of police departments across the country, plus the RPD, does an approach where, for instance, if there's an upsurge in domestic violence calls, that they will have domestic violence training, right? Or if there's a call that goes wrong, then they'll have an in-service about that specific call, like if it was a mental health call, like the unfortunate young man that was killed on near the Open Door Mission. And so they'll have an in-service about something like that. But when it comes to actually having a policy and procedure review around mental health treatment, or around how do we treat minors that are being handcuffed, or how do we treat minors that are in a mental health crisis, to review and implement policy that actually, that is actually evidence-based and actually has been scrutinized by rank and file officers, like Connor was saying, and then also experts. That's what I'm after, right? As a clinician, if I need to talk about, for instance, colon cancer screenings have changed now from 50 down to, I think, 40, 45. And that's because it took years to figure out what changes that was going to make in saving people's lives, right? And they talked to doctors, they talked to medical professionals like me, they talked to nurses, they talked to patients. And then the USPSTF, which is the one of the ones that implements all these different changes in recommending routine prevention screenings, said, we really think that it should be a practice that we do it now at age 45 rather than age 50. And it's going to save lives, but it's evidence-based, it's research-based, and it's also talking to the people that are actually doing the work on the ground every day. So that's how policy actually affects change. That's how policy keeps people safe, right? Mm-hmm. So those are some of the reasons why I want to go after big picture ideas, like, treating people, treating different populations. How are they treated? How are these things done? So
yeah, just for an example, the changes that have happened in human trafficking, the victims aren't treated as criminals at this point, but they were for a long, long time.
Right.
So you have a research department that studies what the problems are and what the policies have been and what other places have done it differently, and they recommend a policy, and you recommend it first to the police chief, and if the police chief buys it, you're done. If they don't buy it, then you go to city council. But Connor was mentioning that the rank and file might need some input too. Maybe that happens during your research process. So you turn into mediators as well, really. So talk to me about what kind of people it takes to do that process, because that's really interesting and different. Are we talking sociologists and social workers and criminologists, and who's going to do all that?
Fantastic. I mean, you do want frankly, you want an academic or two, right? I mean, we have, again, the job descriptions, there's policy analysts, there's rule makers, there's oversight investigators. There's actually people who have specific training and looking, essentially auditing, right? You'd want auditors to be able to look at the organization as a whole. Something people have to realize is RPD is a program, public safety program that the city spends $150 million per year. $100 million on salaries and expenses, $50 million on the benefits, $150 million a year. And we don't have any measurables for success. I'm serious. What are the measurables? Our job, and that we've spent like $1 billion on policing over the last 10 years. Our job is to make sure, hey, we're getting our money's worth when it comes to public safety and stuff. I've never talked to anyone who says that's a bad idea. But the thing is, we've never had that.
You come into the whole giant discussion that's going on about, I mean, some people will say defund the police, but other people will just say, let's make it so it's not, the police are not the front line for every mental health problem, which is being ignored by the medical community, which just because of the way insurance is made and they have been up till now. So how do you see yourselves in that whole big discussion? Is that your purview or is that someone else's purview?
So I'll answer that one. I really have, you talked about mental health and medical professionals. So, I really want to get into the habit of reimagining policing and refocusing or reallocating dollars away from the RPD to places that need it. So that's what I want that's what I want to say. I've got, as a medical professional, I had patients over the years that I had to wait months in order for them to see a psychiatrist. If I was lucky, it would be 3 months. Lucky, right? Sometimes it would be 6. We have a PIC team that is currently staffed, I think, with 14 providers still, that is, having to deal with a ton of calls for mental health, right? 74% of calls that go in, according to the commissioner, are low level, easily managed, acute mental health crises like depression, acute stress reaction, some of those things that can be taken care of with a referral. But we have to have a team of people that can weed through that so that those depression and acute issues don't become something more serious down the line. Or I don't have my medicine, and so I'm going to keep decompensating all month long until all of a sudden I have a run-in with a police officer and I'm killed, right? So these are things that are, a part of our system that the system needs help in. To have an RPD budget, folks, that is so big, that is so bloated, honestly, if I can use that word. When I have patients that I can't even get, medicine for, I can't even get a psychiatry referral for, if I can't even get them, if they go to the hospital, I'm praying that they get to the hospital and they can stay there, because if not, then they're going to be on the street all night, right? So we're resource rich here, but it's only like it just doesn't feel like it gets to the people who needs it. So my vision is taking, number one, our $5 million away from RPD and allocating it to the Police Accountability Board, but then also taking money for the PIC team and other much needed services to pump those funds back into the community, because the community desperately needs it.
Oh, go ahead.
But there's also a lot, just the whole medical system, right, isn't working, that people have to wait 3 months for a bed when they acutely need a bed. And that isn't really going to be solved by cutting the police budget, right? That's a bigger discussion about how healthcare and health insurance work and who's building facilities. And
yeah, I agree and disagree, because it's not the police's job to take care of mentally ill folks. It's the medical community, or the medicine, big M. It's our job as medical professionals and, the state to do that. But one of the things, but remember, the PICS team's job is to keep people safe and keep them out of harm's way, because they are mentally ill and cannot do so for themselves. And so, right, I hope that, and really hoping that as a medical professional that I see, some of these, and, incidentally, New York State is now, taking an interest in really doing some really great things as far as getting mental health services, bringing greater awareness to mental health. But I really would love to see, those types of issues really come into the center and forefront, just because we've had so many incidences where, mentally ill folks have been, mishandled or murdered by police just because there's just not enough training. There's not enough, there's no discipline and there's not enough training. And so, it's honestly looking in from the inside, working the inside, it's a big ball. The answer is, do we need to work, to all of your questions? I guess the answer I would just say is yes, because it's just one is in the other, right? Police are meant to do the jobs that medical professionals should do. Medical professionals are trying to do their jobs, and the resources aren't there, but then we have resources, but then there's not enough, so then the police have to do more and more and more, then they get
Yeah.
more and more and more money. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, from what I understand, if you look in prisons and jails, like as much as half of the population has mental health problems, that if they'd been treated early on, they would never have ended up in prison. But it's a big lift to make that happen. It's kind of huge. I mean, and it's probably way beyond. I mean, it's not primarily a problem of the police department. That's the fact that they end up in prison and jail is not really, because I mean, they sometimes act out and do bad things, and that's the consequence. But if they were being treated earlier and better, and they wouldn't end up there.
I think this just brings up a very important point I want to show a slide on, because the thing is, the city has limited resources. You got like $600-700 million to spend a year. The question is, how do you spend it? Well, we live in a, democracy says, the people should say how it gets spent, right? And, from a system of a bureaucratic system, you think, here are our goals. Here's how we're going to spend that money to get to those goals. And that requires taking a hard look at just the dollars and cents. I just want to show you something briefly, because this is very important. When we talk about policing, we often focus on rhetoric rather than facts. The PAB is supposed to talk about the facts. And I just want to briefly bring up a couple here that have been very useful in kind of reframing the narrative about some of this stuff. So this is a chart, right? I'm going to tell you how to read it. Each bar in this chart represents one city in the United States, and it represents one city that's close to Rochester's size. These are 75 cities closest to our size, cities between 150,000, 250,000 people. The height of each one of these bars is how policed that city is. That's the officer to resident ratio. Follow me? So the higher the bar, the more police per person a city has, right? So look on the right side of the screen. Those are cities that are less policed. Cities on the far left of the screen, those are the cities that are most policed. Guess where Rochester is of these 75 cities closest to our size? We're number 2.
Oh.
We're number 2. Who's the only place that beats us? Birmingham, Alabama. Okay. Compared to the average city our size and just the average city in the United States, we have twice as many police officers per resident. And even when you take into account things like crime rates, demographics, geographic location, we still have a significant number of more police officers than we otherwise would. Now, here's the question. Well, what does this have to mean? Connie, we were talking about budget. What does that mean? Well, what do we pay the average police officer? Ask yourself. I know you've got a number in your head. 60,000, 70,000, 80. In Rochester, it's 100. Each police officer, on average, I'm talking about the highest paid to the lowest paid. The average person gets $100,000. So if we have twice as many officers per average, and we're spending $100,000 per officer, what are we getting for our money? That doesn't have to, that's, you can be, Blue Lives Matter, you can be whatever. The question is, from a governmental perspective, what are we getting for our money? And right now, we're not sure. The Police Accountability Board's job is to figure out, what do we get for the money? And if we spent the money different ways, what we could get there, So every dollar we put in policing, if we put that dollar somewhere else, what would we get for that? It's about the facts. And that's the important thing, getting facts out to the community and having the community have a better conversation about these things. That's where we're going.
Okay, let me look at my questions that are coming in. So is the Civilian Review Board going to be disbanded, or has it been disbanded? What is it? Do you guys replace the old Citizen Review Board?
We replace the old Civilian Review Board when we start accepting complaints, essentially. Once we get all our rules, procedures, people on board, then we open our doors and they kind of go away.
Okay. Another quick question, that 100K per officer, does that include the benefits?
No.
No. Oh, and benefits are like 30 to 50% of salaries,
In
right?
the city of Rochester, it's significantly more, way
More
more
than
than 30 to 40. Way.
Okay. All right. Okay, here's something about body worn cameras. Currently, body worn cameras are standard issue. What happens now if the officers aren't turning them on? Should there be consequences if they're not turned on to conceal conduct?
So I used to work in the federal courts. We have what's called some places call it a tampering rule, some places call it a spoliation rule. The rule is this: if you are involved in a lawsuit and you don't protect evidence and you destroy it, you automatically lose the case. That's the rule in the federal court system. You destroy evidence, the evidence is significant, you lose the case. That is a prophylactic. It's to prevent people from destroying evidence. You have to take a similarly significant position on body-worn camera footage because it's a serious problem. And, and obviously there are cases where, of course, someone mishits the button or something, but not turning, turning your body-worn camera on now for a police officer is like, I'm trying to think of a parallel, Shani, for medical professionals. Like, what's the most basic thing you do to protect the process? Not doing that is just not acceptable. Not acceptable. So we have to make sure that body-worn camera footage is being recorded. And the rules right now, I'm going to be frank, the rules for recording body-worn camera footage are really bad in the city of Rochester. The officers can follow the rules and not record a ton of stuff. That needs to change.
And those rules are set. Are they just set by the police? Does the city council get involved in that kind of thing?
Oh, well, here's the thing. I mean, the police set the rules. City council can always go back and revise the police's rules. We just don't have a city council that's doing that right now.
Right. Let me go back for a minute. We were talking about, what jobs fall to the police and the fact that there's so many mental health issues which are untreated that they end up with police involvement. Is part of the problem a jurisdictional problem with the city and the county? Because I don't think the city has a Department of Mental Health, but the county has a Department of Mental Health. So is that part of the dynamic that's going on here?
There's a lot of dynamic going on there. Like I said, it's city, state, and federal, right? So you have state guidelines, you have federal guidelines, and you have county. So, yeah. But I will say this, that the mental health department in the county now is being led by somebody that Dr. April Aycock, who is really great, innovative, really excited about some of the things that she's going to be trying to do out of there. Don't know what they are yet, but I just really like her as a clinician, and so really excited about. And she's a Black woman, and so I'm really excited about what kind of mental health focused things that are going to come out that are going to especially impact the lives of Black and brown people here in Rochester and in the counties.
That's great. I'm glad to hear you say that, but it's being paid for by the county. So you can't cut the police budget and give that money to a county agency, right? Things don't usually work that way. So I think that's one of the complicating.
Right. We only have, I don't want to, I know this is not a magic wand. There's a lot
No, I'm just
going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, hold on. I guess my thing is that I really want folks to understand that, just as me as your provider that sees your parent, father, daughter, somebody that's dealing with mental illness or even, dementia, I have a set of guidelines that I have to abide by when I treat them in my office, and treat them with respect and dignity. Those the police should have training. They should have documented hours that also keep people safe, and that we actually need to be able to scrutinize those things to make sure that those things are happening. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Okay, so we've got you mentioned that the current city council will be voting on the budget, and we've also got an election a week later where we'll elect well, we'll choose the candidates for the fall election, which will probably be the people who get elected. So how do you factor in with these elections? Are you guys going to end up endorsing candidates based on whether they support you, or tell us how that will work? Also talk to us about what questions we should be asking the candidates as we meet them around town.
Let me preface this by saying that we are a government agency, and so we have to follow very strict rules when it comes to political advocacy. I'm speaking in my personal capacity tonight, and so what I will say only is that the Police Accountability Board Alliance is an outside support group dedicated to supporting the Police Accountability Board. They will be hosting a candidate forum to get the people running for office to answer questions about their support for the PAB. And then they'll be doing an education campaign over the coming weeks to make sure the community knows where people stand on the PAB. And so I can't, and the PAB will not be endorsing any candidates.
I would assume, yeah.
I would assume, but I think the important thing that we can do is make clear to the community what it is we need to do our jobs. And, hopefully, I'll say, all I'll say is you can listen to city council members, where they're at with things, the people who are vocal, the people who are vocal in public, but don't do much behind closed doors, and the people who just don't talk to the PAB, don't answer our emails or anything. So those things are all on the range and spectrum. And I just saw one person, Lewis, asking about why we haven't presented this to exhaustion to the community versus waiting until weeks before the budget is proposed in a council vote. I just want to make clear, the PAB has been working its tail off since it got, inception. And, I got, they hired their first staff member back in November or whatever. And if you're one staff member and you're trying to build out an agency, the first thing you're trying to do is, the basics, right? And it took us this long to build a budget because that's how long it takes to figure out how to build an agency. Like, this is not something we just did overnight. This was months of research and work. And so we released that budget proposal the moment it was ready. And then we've just kind of been campaigning since. I think Shani and I do an average of 1 presentation a day. We're going to get up to 2 coming up soon. And so, yeah, I wish we had more time to do this. And what I'll say is that to community members, I know it's a time crunch, but anyone that wants to help give these presentations, PAB, cityofrochester.gov, help us out.
Okay. There's proposals going around to require RPD officers to live in the city. Is that something you have a position on?
95% of officers don't live in the city. Rochester is a crazy outlier when it comes to that. Well, like I think the average city of our size or something, it's like 30% of officers don't live in the city. I mean, Rochester is just really unusual, right? And so this call, which happens in many other cities across the country, it's really special here because essentially our police force doesn't live in the place that it protects, right? And that's something we hear from the community a lot. A lot of the feedback we had at community sessions was, why don't the people live here? These police officers don't know the communities they live in. How could they? How could they? So I think that's something that, I think part of the issue too, though, people don't know this, but the police chief and the deputy chief, the command staff are required by law to live in the city. The city is allowed to make these people live in the city. The city policy, not the state policy, the city policy is to allow these people not to live in the city. I want to make that very clear because the city often says all police residency issues are at the state level. Not true. The city specifically exempts the command staff from living in the city. So you can't go to the state about that one. That has to be changed here.
Yeah. Okay, here's another question. So I feel like the first time you talked, I pulled out of it that you were going to be totally transparent and release all kinds of stuff, which kind of shocked me how much I thought you were saying. And then you kind of walked that back and said, no, not everything. So now the question is coming in. So how will it be different than what we have now?
So I think the primary difference, I don't know if you all had a chance to finally look up some of the policing related records about allegations of misconduct, right? The city has released a very limited amount of information, right? Essentially only completed investigations, I believe, that resulted in a decision of some kind on discipline, right? That's a tiny fraction of the process, right? They don't release the body-worn camera footage involved in the case. They do a very minimal summary of what actually happened. The police kind of, we still have to actually figure out what it is specifically that we're going to be releasing in every instance. Part of that is talking to experts, figuring out what works, but a lot more information is going to be coming out. The kind of information we are not going to be releasing is stuff that's normally kept private by like law enforcement investigations. Like let's say a complainant says, a police officer domestically abused me and I have a history of domestic violence, right, in my past. We aren't going to make that kind of personal information public. I'm not going to be doing that. We're not going to be doing that for people, right? I'm not going to be outing someone as a domestic violence survivor, right? I'm not going to do that unless I absolutely have to by law or something, okay? So we want to balance, the needs of people who are making complaints versus those of transparency. And while I want to emphasize you're going to get a lot more than what you currently have, we have to have public tracking numbers, for example, for every single allegation that comes in, right? So people have to be able to track allegations as they come through. So these are the kind of things that just don't happen in the current system, right? So those are the kind of things some of the things we're not entirely sure on, but I just want to say in general, it's going to be a lot more transparent.
Mm-hmm. So we're getting some questions about, well, here's one about the Locust Club. So could you summarize briefly what the lawsuit that's going on there is about? And I guess overall there's been a lack of cooperation, but are there some elements in the police force that you're finding are cooperative and that they're hopeful and looking forward? And can you just talk more about what the pressure points are as you try to work to build this up to work with the police?
Something we spend a lot of time on is building relationships. I mean, I think every single board member has relationships with RPD officers, every single one. And we use those relationships to learn about police. I've gone on my way since taking this job to build a relationship with Mike Mazzio, the guy who's suing us, right? Mm-hmm. The guy who's suing to strip us of power, because he's an important player and he's got a perspective, right? And he's someone who's willing to talk. So even though there's resistance from there, we're listening to him. I'll say the place we get the most is rank and file officers, particularly officers of color and women. Those are the people, in part because those are the people who are inside of the system and deal with some crap from the system, right?
You said you get the most what? The most support, the most communication?
Open lines of communication. Lines of communication. For 2 weeks ago, we had a whole hearing on Black RPD officer perspectives, where we heard from a former officer, Marvin Stefferson. Really encourage people to watch that. Really eye-opening. You learn a lot of stuff. You can't possibly hope to change policing without talking to officers, right? I will say we've gotten probably the most resistance from the command staff. For example, RPD just announced a 2-day training, right? The law says PAB has to attend that training. We reached out to the chief of police and said, hey, we'd really like to attend this training so we can understand where officers are coming from, what they're learning. The chief said, no, I don't want you to come because I want my officers to feel like they can be open and honest. Which, I don't know how people feel about that. But, and we've had to push on that, and still the city's still pushing back on our ability to attend this stuff. This city and the RPD, I'm talking, high level bureaucrats here, don't let us, they're resisting us looking at basic policing information like training slideshows and stuff, right? The law says we have to look at this, and we can't possibly hope to review training without attending the things and looking at slideshows. But so the resistance is not coming, frankly, from rank and file. It's coming from the system.
Right. Okay, so then speaking of training, we've got another question coming in saying mostly police do their jobs without ever drawing their weapons. They're open carrying, but most of the time they're not using weapons. So what is their training? How much do they get trained in how to work with the public and how to de-escalate problems compared with how to hold your gun?
Great question. We really want to know the answer.
How to
And
tell a taser from a gun, for example.
no, seriously, right? So here's a great one we get asked a lot. What's up with officers shooting to kill instead of shooting to maim? Why don't officers shoot people in the leg? Now, police departments have a really quick answer to that. And they, police research forums and stuff have a lot of answers saying you have to train people to shoot at the center of mass. Otherwise, you're going to miss them and that's going to cause more harm, right? Now, the question is that true? In the same way that, is officer training about, carrying weapons effective? These are questions that we need to answer, and we can only answer them with access to the facts. And so that question about, how much our officers are getting trained, it's our job to find out. And I am certain that we're going to get answers for the community on that. It's just going to take a little time. But all I want to say is, we want to hire a team to do this. And people say, well, do you need a whole team of policy staff and people looking at this? This is a $150 million program. Think about all the questions you have. Why are there police officers at East Avenue? How much are we spending on, the police's, those mounted horses team? Why do we have horses? Why does the RPD have a scuba team? Why are we doing animal control through the police? Why are we doing traffic control for the police? Everyone's got a million questions, and you need to get real answers on those things. You need people taking it seriously. There's just so much to look at here, and that's why we need real staff.
Mm-hmm. So somebody's asking is, to some extent, some of the work that you're talking about is being done internally now, and now you are supposed to do it. And so as part of the resistance to the budget that they think somehow we're paying to do it twice, is there any way that might abate as you gain in power and they could stop doing some of it internally, whatever it is they're doing now?
Yeah, so it's funny because, when Chair Wilson talks about reallocating money from RPD to do our jobs, there's actually really good reasons to do it, right? RPD is going to be doing less work on this stuff because of us, right? Remember, we're supposed to be the place where officers can file complaints, right? That's supposed to be us. So yes, the city, the thing is, PAB is a money saver because there's a bunch of stuff the city's not going to have to do anymore because of us, right? So that $1.2 million they spend on internal affairs, that should be reduced because of PAB. If they keep that money at the same level, that is duplicative, right? The issue is that we're going to do our job. We're frankly going to do our jobs better than internal affairs. I can talk all night about internal affairs programs don't work. Police don't like them. The police or people who work in them don't like them. One of the things I talked to Mike Mazzio about is how does the current system work? And he's like, it's a kangaroo court. It's all political, right? Yep. Police don't want it. We don't want it. There's so many things like that in policing that everyone agrees, just throw out the door. But here's the important thing on that. Remember school resource officers? Police used to be in schools. And last year, the city said, we don't want police in schools anymore. They were spending $1.2 million on that program. So they cut the program. They didn't cut the RPD's budget, right? Mm-hmm. So that's how these things often happen with the police. You take responsibilities away from the police department, but the funding goes up, right? And that's, from a systems perspective, that doesn't make any sense. If you used to do a task and you don't have to do it anymore, those resources can be reallocated. And so we have to keep that in mind. Actually, frankly, to get back to the question, the actual resistance we get from people is people think that we're asking the city to raise tax revenue to come up with this additional $5 million. That's the opposite of what we're saying. We're saying there's a ton of reallocations that can happen here, right?
Okay. So here's an interesting question. If you think that there's some kind of police behavior that's problematic, do you have to wait for someone to file a complaint, or can you take initiative to start an investigation?
Something that's really amazing is, you talk to other police accountability boards and they say, man, You guys have powers that are unprecedented. And because of those unprecedented powers, you'll be able to make people safer. This is one of them. It is extremely rare for a police accountability board. I think it's unprecedented, actually. Most police accountability boards, you have to have a complaint to investigate a case. We don't. Why is that important? Because in many cases, people are afraid of filing a complaint, either because they're a citizen who's afraid of retaliation, or actually more commonly, they're a police officer who's afraid of retaliation. Seriously, it's a real problem in police departments, right? So our ability to, frankly, someone sends it like an email, or someone just says, hey, like this happened, can you look into it? We can launch an investigation into that. And that's so important, particularly for systemic issues. I'm not getting into the details. One thing we continue to hear is about, potential white supremacist, relationships, right? With very specific people. That's the kind of place where our ability to independently and launch investigations is going to be a great thing.
So I also wanted to give another example, where people, would have to have a specific officer complaint. People can make anonymous complaints also. And a lot of folks don't, a lot of civilian review boards and police accountability boards across the country don't allow that. So, for instance, we had a case that was brought to my attention where a person in custody, a female in custody, she was mishandled by a police officer, ended up going to premature labor after her baby was harmed. Almost, baby survived, she survived, but she refused to make a complaint because she was on probation and didn't want there to be repercussions. And so, those are cases that actually an OBGYN that I'm familiar with in the community brought it to me personally and said, what can we do about this? Because is there a policy? Is there a policy about how the police department treats people that are pregnant? And if not, then why not? Right? So that'd be something to investigate. I don't need somebody to tell me, I don't need a complainant to tell me about that. I can investigate it or call for an investigation ourselves. So those are things that, again, policy and procedure and practices review will go ahead and address those problems, because just like in medicine, the art of medicine, there's an art of policing, right? There is the way that I, as a provider, interpret the knowledge that I have and use it every day. Same thing, just like a police officer will do. So that all those three things need to be scrutinized. And just the reason being just about the example that I just used.
So Connor, going back, I think I asked you to talk more about this lawsuit with the Locust Club. Can you just give us the elevator speech on what is it that happened there? What are they suing for? What's it based on?
Okay. So they are trying to strip the Police Accountability Board of our power to discipline officers. The legal argument actually boils down to whether or not the city has an exemption from state law, labor law requirements, right? So state labor law generally says the police are able to negotiate over disciplinary issues, but there are some carve-outs for places that before that law was passed in 1970, directly controlled police discipline, right? And the question is Rochester one of those places? That is what that whole lawsuit boils down to, is really that question. Are we grandfathered into this labor law? That's it. So right now, there are three levels of courts in New York. The lowest level is called the Supreme Court for a weird reason. Then there's the appellate division, and then the Court of Appeals. Weird, don't know why they're called that. But right now we have a decision from the lowest court, the Supreme Court. They said, we agree with the police union. You aren't grandfathered in. Right now it's at the appellate division. It's been sitting there for 6 months, which is a really long time for one of these cases, which probably means they're really digging into the details. They're going to come out with a decision. It could be any week, could be sometime in early June, right? That decision, I promise, whatever it is, it's going to be appealed to the Court of Appeals, and that's going to take another 6 months or something. So we got some time to wait for a final decision. But the reality is, disciplinary power could come back in some form in a couple weeks, right? But the thing is, if we get disciplinary power back, it doesn't matter if we don't have the investigators. The real change, if we get disciplinary power, is way more people are going to file complaints. Way more people. Because if you think that there's a chance to actually have the PAB impose consequences, I want to say those consequences aren't firing of officers solely, right? PAB is really focused on restorative justice, right? So having people have public apologies, maybe transferring some money from officer salaries to the armed person, right? These kind of things that aren't necessarily punitive, but try and restore balance. That's what we're focused on. And that's what the law says we can do. Also things like retraining, addressing systems, it's kind of cool. But the point is that even if we get disciplinary power back, it just emphasizes the need for resources rather than taking that need off the table or something.
Right. So I guess I'm left thinking, I can understand why the police might be defensive and reluctant, but 77% of the public voted for this, and the city council and the mayor are publicly elected and not in the line of fire that are going to get in trouble on this. So why is the political support from the elected leadership seem not to match what the public voted in the referendum that created you?
Phenomenal question. Chair Wilson, I got my own answer, but I'll let you.
And I love how you always turf that question to me, man. Like, heck, why doesn't it match up? Gosh, I mean, well, look, I can only speak for, I can't speak for them. I mean, I know that we are, we're wondering the same. I think the citizens of Rochester are wondering the same. There is, again, guys, I think that the police department is the most powerful part of city government. And, you're in an election year. If I can be honest, there is also, I think there's also just a fear of change. This Rochester is a very much a, we do things as we do them town. And you were talking about redefining the public safety system here. And you're also talking about doing that. And you're talking about a group that has an immense amount of power that wants to use it and, won't stop until we are able to really have with the community, redefine what this looks like. And so I think that people really are hesitant to join on. I think it's going to take education just like this to do that. But, I'm also wondering, those same questions, and hope that the people watching this and the people that will watch this later on will ask the same questions and demand more from their city government, because they deserve it. Okay,
we're getting close to the end here, but I got one question that I just want to read to you and get a response. I must say, I feel this has made me look at things a little differently. I've been a first responder for over 31 years in this county and responded to thousands of calls with officers from different departments. We must address it by being transparent. Anything that comes out of City Hall brings apprehension. Comments?
Transparency is the name of the game. It does reframe, people, again, Chair Wilson has a great line about, policing. It's not about bad apples. It's not about good apples. It's about a rotten tree. And, that can, we're not talking, so many people, I assume most people know a cop, friends with somebody, they're your neighbor. And when you see policing through that, you think, well, I know that person, it's a good person, right? But the thing is, it's a system, right? You can be the best person in the world. And if you are tasked with a job that asks you to do too much, doesn't train you properly to do the job, doesn't give you the resources to do the job, it doesn't matter how good you are. And so that's why it's our job to make sure the system's transparent so we can all work together to change it. I just want to draw that answer back to the question about city council and political support. I got two answers on that one. First, I frankly don't think that a lot of elected officials knew what the PAB was. May not have read the legislation before voting for it. I can't tell you how many, that whole presentation I gave you in the beginning. Here's what the CRB does. Here's what we do. Part of the reason I do that is because I'm pretty sure a lot of people in city government think we're just like the CRB plus discipline. And if you think that, you can see why we don't need to give this thing support. We didn't give that much support to the CAB. Why are there so many problems? Why are there so many issues? But when you step back and say, oh, wow, the PAB is like a government accountability unit. And so that gets to the second point. Shani already talked on it. The police department's the heart of local government. when people think, oh, okay, you're an accountability board just for this little part of, no, 1 out of every 3 city employees works for the police department. They have the most powerful union.
1 out of 3?
1 out of 3, about
Ooh.
30%, right? About 30%. Okay. Now listen, now 30, 28, something like that now, depends on how many officers there are. Here's the thing though. They're the most powerful political arm in the city. And here's the thing too, you are a mayor. This is something really people really don't understand. You're the mayor. Technically, you're in charge of the police, right? You get elected. You can be the biggest reformed person possible. Your first day on the job, someone gets shot by a police officer. You go to the police department, police chief says, you know what? I looked into this and it's all good. What are you going to do? Police department is a bunch of, they frame it as we are professionals. We know how to do our job. Who are you to question us? Oh, and I'm not talking about individual officers. I'm talking about the command staff. Here's the thing about policing. Imagine you want to, change policing. It's all on you as a mayor. It's all on you as city councilor or something. It's impossible to do.
Right.
Which is why we need an agency dedicated to bringing the community together. There was a question here from Diane about, if PAB doesn't have, the ability to impose new policies, how do we do it? The same way we get anything done. City council, frankly, city council only does things when the community stands up and demands it, right? That's the way politics works. And so the PAB is supposed to make the community's power stronger by centering voices and giving facts. It's just about the theory of change.
Now I get why politicians are afraid. Yeah. All right. So I think we're just going to wind up, but let me just ask you to review. So I know the league is sponsoring a debate on Monday with the deltas for the city council. So that's an opportunity for people to tune in and hear what the different city council candidates are saying. When did you say the Police Accountability Coalition?
The Alliance, I think, Shani, it's sometime the week of the 24th, the week of the 23rd.
It's week of, yep, so it's the 25th is the tentative date. Yep.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye out for that.
And all I'll say is this presentation we gave you, we've given way more in-depth presentations to city council members. And, we've asked, do you have any questions? And outside of some very basic ones, and frankly, from, I'll say Miguel Melendez and Mary Lupian, not a lot of questions from people.
Yep.
I don't know if these people have read the budget, but we've certainly given them the opportunity to do so. So that's all I'll say on that. Okay,
so we should all be asking the candidates, all of them, the incumbents and the challengers, what they're envisioning here and why they think the public voted for a PAB. And I mean, frankly, this reminds me of, at the state level, we have an independent redistricting commission to draw up the new districts, but they weren't given a budget. They didn't even have business cards. They didn't have an office. They didn't have phones. It's almost to that degree.
It's exactly that.
The same.
It took us 3 months to get garbage picked up. Our office was just covered in garbage, and it took like so many calls to get it done. It's exactly like that. I'm sorry.
Exactly like that. Yep. Pretty much.
All righty. So I think I'm going to invite Judy Sternberg back. She's going to see us out. So I'll say goodbye to everyone.
Shani, Connor, thank you so much. Barbara, thank you so much. Let me just, and thanks everybody for attending. I just want to put up our last slide here. So we invite everyone attending to join us on Monday evening for the Democratic Primary Candidate Forum for the Rochester City Council at large seats. And this is going to be co-sponsored with our friends at the alumni chapter of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. You need to register for this, and you can find the link to the registration by going to the League's website at www.LWV-RMA.org. And again, the League is going to be discussing what we can do to support the the PAB funding needs. And we look forward to the outcome of the city budget. Thank you so much. I'm going to say good night to everybody now. Good night.